Hi, my name's Connor. I'm a lecturer and I make stuff in Twine. Today I'm going to be looking at custom buttons that you can make in Twine, and hopefully that will be useful. A student asked me if I can show them how to make custom buttons, so that's what I'm going to do. The first thing that I will show you is what we're going to be working with today, and then I'll go on to show you how I made it. Okay, so let's jump over to the Twine scene, and I've got a little scene set up here with a video background of something that I stole, and then there are a few buttons that we have here. Working through them, we've got a button with a little custom graphic, that same graphic twisted slightly because sometimes you will have horizontal or vertical buttons, a video with a color background, a video with a color background that has a border, a button that has an animation added to it, and then a secret button that I'll talk about in just a moment. So, first of all, if you want to have a button with a custom background, it requires you to learn a little bit about CSS, or cascading style sheets. To make my Twine game look a little bit more unique, a little bit more like the kind of thing that I would usually make, I put it in what's called a grid, a CSS grid. And I've got more videos on CSS grids, so be sure to watch those if you're curious. But basically, I've just set up a grid in the same way that you would have in Google Docs or Excel or anything like that, and that just helps me keep the buttons on my page organized, or any content that you would work with. It's a good idea to have a CSS grid. Also, if you go in to do anything like web design, you'll work a lot with grids and flex boxes and stuff there. So that's why my buttons are arranged the way that they are. You can see here that I have the video that's playing in the background, and then I have my divs organized in the way that they're organized, which lays them out in that kind of grid shape. Okay, so moving quickly on. One thing you probably notice as well is I have these three little curly dashes. Those help ignore Twine's built-in style sheet, which stops any kind of weirdness. Twine loves putting breaks in between things, so that's necessary. If you're going to do like quite customized designs, it's good to have those three curly brackets in place, just to make sure that Twine doesn't mess with your custom design at all. So let's have a look at the first button that I've called button A. All right, so button A is our little design here, and if we have a look at button A in our CSS, you can see how I've organized it. The first thing is that I have the background image in my CSS, and what I have done here is essentially took an image that I found on Google image search results, and then I took that into paint.net, took the background away, re-uploaded it to ImageBB, and now I can use that image in my game. If I was going to release this properly, I would definitely try to give the creator some credit for that. So thank you very much for making this kind of scroll image, whoever you are. Once I have that aligned though, if I didn't have some of the next parts, lots of weird stuff would happen. If you just tried to put in a background image and apply it onto a div where your button is going to be in your game, it'll stretch in all kinds of weird ways. So it's really important that you try to use careful background positions and then also background sizes. I think the best thing is to try and use the center keyword. So if you have things centered and they don't repeat, and then importantly, that your image is contained as its background size, that will keep things nice and neat. Then you can have your background image inherit size from the box or div that it's contained within through the background size 100, 100. Now, there's also another little detail here, which is Z index. Now, if you have something where your buttons overlap with something else, it could be useful for your buttons to kind of be on top. So sometimes, particularly if you're using links and hooks in Twine, it can be useful for things to be on top so you can still click them even though something else is visible. So Z index is a way of talking about kind of how close or how far out of the screen something is. If something is on a Z index, it's like -1, then it's underneath everything. If ZX is a 10, it's on top of everything, okay? But I don't use that very often here. I just thought it was a good time to bring it up. So that all together creates my first button with this custom image that is stretched. Now, if I was to extend the width of this button so that it would be slightly wider, let's say I want to set it to a width of 20 units of the viewport width. Okay, what would happen? Well, first of all, I'm going to publish this to my local file because I'm kind of working offline here. And then I will go ahead and reload custom buttons, and you can see that my button kind of gets bigger. Now, these images that I'm working with are kind of okay to do this with because they're kind of reminiscent of like SVGs or vector images, even though they're not. So they stretch kind of nicely. But if you're doing it with really detailed JPEGs, that kind of stretching isn't going to work really, really well. Okay, so the same thing works for button B, but you'll see that I don't have that Z index involved there at all. And I have gone ahead and just used the exact same proportions. This is contained 100% and 100% in the div that it's in. And that's probably the most important thing to kind of understand about this, is that when you have your buttons in a scene, in a grid, you use these class keywords within your CSS to define how they are presented to your user. So if you go ahead and make sure that you have a CSS grid in your scene, make sure to watch my other videos on that. Then when you have button class A applied, everything that's within that div is what is going to be applied to what the rules you write in the CSS, okay? So always try to think about it that way. You make a div is a little container, you make a rule for that div in your CSS, and then everything within the div has that rule applied to it. Importantly, things also, because it's a cascading style sheet, are always inheriting from what comes above. So if you think that the main level of thing in a Twine game is always going to be TW passage, the rules from that always get inherited down. Anyway, not getting too far off topic, let's talk about some of the more interesting buttons that we have here. Sometimes you may not want to use an image, you might want to use just a color that you make yourself. Something this can be really useful for is things like health bars. You know, if you imagine that you have a health bar that starts off at a certain width and decreases in width, you know, based on a certain figure or something, you can use this as a way of doing a health bar, but of course, it obviously can work as a button as well. To do that, you will simply use the background color property. Okay, so if we switch over to button C now, you can see that I have got button C as text aligned in the center. It's a width of viewport width of 5.5. I just found that that looked okay. Feel free to experiment with viewport width. It's a nice scalable unit. I've set the background color to red and then border radius to 25 pixels, okay? What the heck is border radius? Well, that's why my button is curved the way that it is. And I just like that. I think curved buttons look kind of nice. They've got kind of a professional look to them, somewhat. But you can use that as much as you like or as little as you like. Maybe you like really square buttons. But yeah, there you go. It's just a nice, simple, squared button with rounded corners. Sometimes you might want to add a border to that. If you want to add a border to your button, you have to start off by saying border style solid. There are a couple of different border styles. There's also dotted and a few other things, but generally if you want a border, you'll want it to be, you know, a solid border. And then border width, you can either set a border width based on certain pixel values or a relative value, or you can just use these keywords of small, medium, or large. And then you set your border color, and then I've added a border radius to round things off again as well. And that gives me this button D. Now, where things get kind of more interesting, I guess, is using a button that has an animation. And this could be really fun if you're doing a game that's kind of like, I don't know, playful, like Alice in Wonderland style, and you want the buttons to be kind of mischievous or misbehaving in some way. And while it's possible to use Twine's built-in animations that it has, those little enchants, those can be a little bit unreliable, and I just find using the CSS animations can be much more foolproof and also teach you things that you can take out of Twine and use in just web development in general. If you want to have an animation, you first have to define a new keyframes rule. I usually do these at the top of my style sheet just so that I know where they are. And I wrote this CSS wobble. Now, I didn't actually write it. I just Googled CSS wobble. Somebody else had written it for me. And I went ahead and stole it, put it into my CSS, okay? So that takes the keyframes name, and then we gave it the name wobble, but that could be whatever you want it to be. And then we just make sure to call that animation in our button or whatever it is that we want to use. I like using the animation keyword. It keeps things nice and neat, but you can break these into individual lines if you prefer that. And the basic way that this works is you would say animation, what's the animation you want to call? Well, I want to call wobble. I want it to last 3 seconds. I would like it to play in a linear fashion. There's also things like ease in, where it starts slow and then ramps up. Then there's ease in, start slow, ramp up, and ease out. So ease in, out. And there's a few other styles that you can use. Then you're going to say how many times you want it to play. Obviously, infinite will kind of be a loop of an animation. You can do directions as well. So something can be forwards, where if it plays once, let's say, it keeps the properties that it has at the end of the animation rather than at the beginning, or you could do backwards. There's different things like that. And then also a delay that you want to have before the animation begins. And it's sometimes good to have a little delay in your animations. This can be really important with Twine Harlow, which actually sometimes has problems displaying animations just because of the way it's written. So sometimes it's good to have like a 2-second delay before animations begin, just so that you can wait for everything to load. In Twine Sugarcube, you can basically hardwire things so that they won't start until everything is loaded, but you can't do it in Harlow, as far as I know, just yet. Okay, so that's how you would get a nice dancey button like this one. But what about this last one, the secret button? Well, that's this one, okay? Which I kind of like. I think it's cool to have a button that grows and takes up the whole screen. Obviously, you probably wouldn't want to use something so extreme, but I thought that that would work well as kind of an example of what you can do if you really want to take things nuts. Imagine a big scary face on a door, and you want to like stretch the graphic really broad, so that if somebody tries to open the door, it's like trying to open and eat your face. Something like that I think could be kind of interesting. So how do we do something like that? Is it animations again? Actually, no, it's not animations this time. This time we are using the hover keyword and using CSS transitions. So you'll see here that I have got a width and height for my button. This is button F that I'm defining now. And I've said I want 5.5 units of viewport width for the button and 5 units of viewport height for the button. But when I look at my next rule, it is also button F, but this time button F : hover. So this is a sort of substate of button F. To get to this new state, which has got these crazy dimensions of 80 units of viewport width and 80 units of viewport height, I have said that I want the amazing CSS transition to take place. And the CSS transition I have then defined to say, please transition to the new width that I've defined and the new height that I've defined over the period of 3 seconds. And you could do it with different times. There's also ease in and ease out. And there's different properties that you can use here as well, just like in the animations. But the reason we're doing this instead of animation is that I can also define a transition on the first button F. So in other words, when I stop hovering, then the transition from the first button F definition starts then scaling back down to the original width and height over the same course of time. Okay, so it's a little bit confusing. It's kind of like setting 2 animations instead of just writing a rule for 1 animation and then declaring it wherever you want. So it's a little bit more bitty that way, but it means that you can have this nice effect that you would otherwise need to use JavaScript to achieve. And given that Twine's JavaScript support is not always great, it's good that we have transitions to work with as well. Okay, so as usual, I'm going to give you access to the HTML that I was just showing you. Feel free to do whatever you want with that. If there are any more styles of buttons that you would like me to show you how to use, if there's anything else that you can think of in Twine that you would like me to try and create and share with you, just let me know in the comments. And thanks so much for watching.